Hey guys, this is Brad Dyke on my third rendition of the operations and management of IT. And this is about 3-in-1. 3-in-1 policy it has had many other names, but 3-in-1 stuck with me because it made perfect sense. It's very good. What is 3-in-1? Well, 3-in-1 policy basically is that nothing makes it to production in your environment. I don't care if you've got 1,000 nodes or you've only had 10 nodes. Nothing makes it to production without it first going through 2 other tiers. So that means 3 tiers to be production, which is 1. Hence the word 3-in-1. So what does this mean? Well, you have 3 tiers of support. If you were using AWS or Google, you'd have 3 separate structures or groups or accounts. One would be called test, one would be called QA or quality, or whatever rendition you want to call it. Some people can call it configuration in QA. And of course you have production. Sometimes production may include a secondary component called staging. Very common. It's more prevalent on software side as it is versus manufacturing side. But basically these 3 accounts or groups contain identical examples of production. But they're scaled down and they're scaled back. So let's use AWS as a controller in this case. What we basically are dealing with here is if you are wanting to get to this strategy, I will walk you through that step. But please understand it takes patience and time and adjustments. So let me explain. You want to do 3-in-1, or you want to do a controlled configuration management with test, quality, and production deployments. You have to first see what you've got. Now, most of the time you just have a production environment and you don't have a quality or a test. Those are actually those are great, because all you have to do is clone each environment, move a copy of the clones over into quality and into test, bring the clones up, set them, configure them, and make them active so they resemble production exactly alike. VPNs, firewalls, CloudWatch, CloudTrails, IAM, everything exactly the same. Why? Because test is a place where you can cut your teeth. You can bring something new into your production environment, always coming in from your dev and your sandboxes, and it goes first into test. Then integrating to test on a back-scaled version of production. What I mean by that is that your production may be using T3s or M5s or other versions of instances that are fairly powerful, and they're not cheap. But you can get down to T2s, micro instances that are free for 700 some odd hours, or lower-ended instances that don't need the same amount of resources because they're not computing and handling the same workloads. But they are scaled-down versions of production. So test. What is the value of having a test account bring in new products for review, testing, configuration, and prep for deployment? Well, test lets you do that. It lets you build your SOPs, your standard operating procedure guidelines, for how you do it. The SOPs are critical because they have to be moved off into your DevOps environment as part of the resources for your playbooks. What is a playbook? Well, a playbook basically is an instance that has the pre-work before you would bring an instance online, as in you're pre-configuring resources and attributes and configurations, or you may be required to do backups or snapshots or something like that. Whatever pre-work you have to do before you execute your task. The middle part, which is execution of task, that's DevOps. And then the post part, that's review, confirming that your systems are operational still, that the services are acting correctly, performance requirements, metrics, and so on and so on and so on. And of course, post monitoring. That's what your playbook covers. And the run book tells you how many instances or how many deployments for that one execution will be required to bring everything up to spec. So that can be pretty drastic. If you're doing security updates, it's going to be everything you got in test, quality, and prod. If you're doing just a PHP update, then it's only the PHP nodes that you're going to be doing, and so on. So that's why you want to do test. You want to bite your teeth on this process, this new whatever, get it fully vetted, get everything documented and approved by management, myself, before I'll let you go to quality. Now, the key thing about quality is you execute your playbook using the SOPs and everything that was developed against your run book for quality, and it better work because you said it did, and it was, approved and finalized in test. So it should be rinse and repeat, and that all we should be focusing on is performance and quality review. And that's a good sign. When something breaks, you stop. Go back, find out what happened. What's wrong? It could be that your configuration of quality, the account itself, could be misconfigured to test and prod. Good catch. 3-in-1. Everything needs to be the same. Correct the problem, make the adjustments, re-execute again, then go ahead and execute your Q&A processes to make sure everything looks good. Now you've got a fast, clean deployment process with a good strategy. You have a capacity to be able to correct anything that was very minor or left over, that was missed in test because of potential account configuration differences, and it gives you somewhat of an eyes up when you go to your production environment account, because in there you're going to have to make sure that you covered the bases that got by in quality. But by that time you're ready to deploy, and if in my case we have a staging platform which gets deployed first in production, tested, vetted, which of course changes your playbook, which has to be reflected in your playbook implementation for prod. There's always a little difference between test, quality, and prod. And then of course the final component of deploying to the production side, and of course again the playbook, post, review, services, and so on, with hypercare activity and monitoring and so on set up in the post process. That's a dream job. Doesn't exist. I'll tell you now. Most of the time you'll come into an environment that will already have these accounts created in some indirect way. They were lessons learned the hard way, or they came in under a best practice deployment that doctrine got changed because you changed the nature of your coding. So what we normally encounter in the real world is you have 3 loosey-goosey versions of test, quality, and production, and none of them are the same. In other words, you'll find that test is, if you're in AWS, we use that as an example, you've got multi-regions deployments in test. You're in the wrong region in quality, and your VPNs and WAFs are off, and prod is somewhat fairly obviously functional because it's production. So that's your reality. And what you have to do in a case like that is very similar to what we just discussed about the pristine version of getting it, where you don't have anything and you get to create the other 2 tiers to support the production tier. The only caveat is discovery. You have to go out and you have to discover, and this could take a slick 12 to 16 months because you have a lot of in-house knowledge. In other words, you got people, one person in each division that has certain knowledges in their head, and you have to go after them and you have to get the information out of their heads because they don't want it to fail, but they know if they don't get it in documented format, so that we can identify it and then begin to design integrations and realignment steps to make those other 2 tiers to look like production, then and only then are we going to be able to get to a 3-in-1 policy that's fairly functional for DevOps. So let me say this very important detail. DevOps will not work correctly if you do not do this. You genuinely have to focus on continuing to align all 3 tiers, test, quality, and prod, into the same model, just scaled back and reduced in footprint. That's it. If you have a load balancer in production and it's 9 nodes, then in quality it's 3 nodes, and in test it's 2 nodes. You see what I'm saying? You're shrinking down its footprint, and you might be using smaller CPU resources, but it's pretty much identical across the board. That's how DevOps can work efficiently. This is where the coders get all the support they need, the developers get the co-crossing support they need to make sure that today's and tomorrow's look the same, and operations can keep things operational during all of this chaos. And it can be chaotic in some regards, because most companies, DevOps, are so unique, you won't find another one anywhere else. That's part of the discovery process. So we talked to the 3-in-1 strategy to get control over this. to take an enterprise mindset and software configuration management and funnel it into a more practical DevOps support mechanism so DevOps can be more efficient and automation can be cleaner down the road. Pay attention, it takes time. Do it right the first time. Confirm everything twice. Never, never, never just pull the trigger. It's not good to do so because inevitably, if you're not following a set of processes, you're missing something. Don't make that mistake. That's unfortunately a very common thing that happens, especially with mid-sized companies that are trying to stop being a small company and starting to act more like a larger scale company going forward. So with that, if you have questions, please send them to me if you want. DevOps is still a fairly new industry environment, and it's got many different flavors out there. And I come from a software tooling environment opposed to a manufacturing environment, which is completely different than IoT, which is completely different than controlled data, environments, and out to GDPR, and so many other potential environments. Remember that DevOps is unique to the nature of the company it supports. So, with that being said, that was quite a bit to go over. But remember, 3-in-1 is really simple. You want 3 environments: 1 you can screw up, 1 that you want to make sure it's refined, and 2 you never mess with. It's got to be right before it goes out the door. That's it. How you get your resources realigned is strictly based on what you have to set up. And if you have disparated variations, then your discovery process. Document it all. Don't execute anything. Document everything. With that being said, this is Brad Dyke. I'm going to reach out to you guys and say have a great week. And I'll be releasing a video on hardware, talking about some new things which are coming down the road. Take care and God bless.